Welcome everybody to Heroes of the Storm video, where we are going to talk about the MMR and the matchmaking system. And this is going to be a video where I try to explain what Blizzard did with the last patch, where they introduced a soft reset to the system, why a lot of people are currently a little bit disappointed with it, and why that is actually the totally wrong approach. There's a lot of question right now. If you go to Reddit, if you check out Twitter, or you just watch streams on Twitch, a lot of people don't really understand what the reset did and why exactly the system is currently working as it is, and they're complaining about being placed in the wrong league, that Grandmaster right now is not really an accurate representation of skill, but it's more like a grind and nothing else. And I want to talk about it a bit because I feel a lot of people don't really understand what a matchmaking system is, how the MMR got changed with the latest patch, and how all these things actually work. I want to apologize right from the start because, well, I'm aiming for a 10-minute video, and I already know that this is never going to happen because, in case you didn't notice yet, I like to talk. So I'm going to try and put all the important stuff up to the front of the video, because I will definitely go off the rail at some point and start talking about the weather and what I had for breakfast. Probably not quite to that extent, but you get the idea. So I'm going to try and keep the important stuff right at the beginning of the video so that you guys can just get a bit of an idea what it's all about, and then later on we're probably going to drift off a little bit to topics that are still connected to all of this, but maybe not important to everybody. So your MMR is nothing else but the number that Blizzard internally uses for their matchmaking algorithm to express how good you are. So it's basically your skill. How good are you as a player? And the system is, of course, always changing that. So, for example, if you are facing an opponent that's roughly on your skill level, has the same MMR, and you beat that opponent, the system says like, all right, he is better, and you gain a few MMR points. If you lose them. And of course, that also changes when you face an opponent that is supposed to be stronger than you, or that is supposed to be weaker than you. If you beat a tougher opponent, you gain more points. If you lose against someone that you're supposed to beat because you have a higher MMR, your skill level is supposedly higher than his, then of course you're going to lose more points as well. The important thing with this is to realize that, first of all, your MMR is constantly changing, and also how it's changing, because it's very different at the beginning of the season or at the beginning of your career. Let's say, for example, you play your first game, and the system starts you at a certain MMR range. You have also an uncertainty factor that is attached to your MMR, and that is it's a multiplier. And basically, the only thing that it says is that if you have a very small sample size, a very small amount of games played so far, your MMR is going to change much faster. For example, if you win your first game, the system is going to give you a certain amount of MMR points, MMR rises, but that number is also multiplied with that uncertainty factor. And at the beginning of your career, the uncertainty factor is actually quite high. So the system gives you the benefit of the doubt, says that you're actually a lot stronger than you're supposed, or that it thinks you are, and gives you a lot more points. If you continue winning, that trend just keeps going. If you lose, on the other hand, you're also going to lose a lot more points. The important thing to realize here is that this is actually changing the more games you play. So, for example, if your sample size is quite high, you have roughly 100 games already, your uncertainty factor is getting smaller and smaller and smaller by the time. And that results in you gaining less points if you win a game, and also losing less points if you lose a game. Because the system is basically saying, I guess I got that right. So it's not as uncertain anymore as it was before, that you're on the level that you're supposed to be. And this is actually incredibly important to know, because it's one of the things that is going to play a role later when we're talking about the changes that Blizzard made with that soft reset. Another important thing before we talk about it is something that I want to throw out there, because it's a bit of a general thing. Matchmaking systems are a lot easier when you apply them to a one-on-one game. It becomes much harder when we're talking about a team game, because it's not only about you, but it's also about the teammates that you are matched with. Of course, the system is always going to try to make sure that everybody is roughly on the same range, but it can't always do that. Sometimes there's not as many players on as you would think, especially in your MMR range, and sometimes the queue time is so long that the system says like, alright, I'm not really able to match that guy with people that are on the same level, but I have another one that is a little bit stronger than he is, and I have someone that is a little bit weaker, so let's match those two into the same team as well and try to even it out. It's not always the ideal solution, but in a team match, or in a team game, it's always quite difficult to actually go for that perfect matchmaking. And another thing that we also have to realize is that in a mobile game, this entire issue, this entire question becomes even more difficult, because the system, for example, cannot decide whether you just had a bad game because you had to play a role that you're not familiar with, or if you're just really losing matches because you as a player are a lot worse than he thinks you are. So let's say, for example, we have a tank player that absolutely excels on tanks. This guy's a god, right? But he really, really sucks on supports. Now we're having a matchmaking system that pushes you into a Hero League game, and all of a sudden it turns out that the only role that you guys are missing at the end of the draft process is a healer. Supports are already, so everybody else's tanks are already taken, so this guy that is an absolute god on a tank all of a sudden has to play a hero that he's not familiar with, and you guys lose the game. So the system has to kind of find out, did he have a bad game? Is he really like bad? Or what exactly is going on here? And that makes things, of course, a lot more difficult as well. So that's something that you always have to keep in mind when we're talking about like matchmaking, and also when we're talking about like how skilled a player is. Not every player is as good on has the same level of skill in every role and on every hero. People have actually been criticizing the matchmaking system for a long time, and there was good reason for that. Blizzard had to improve the matchmaking system. It was really not all that good, but it was also Blizzard's first approach to really get into that team game aspect, and it was their first MOBA, so they adjusted the entire algorithm over time. And it wasn't only the algorithm that changed, but it was also the rules with which you could queue. For example, when we started with the Hero League aspect, you could queue with a lot more people than today. Today, it's a restriction to a dual queue. Back then, I think you could even queue with 5, because it was before Team League happened, and yeah, you could queue with a lot more people. And that's, of course, something that for a system is incredibly difficult to actually deal with, because all of a sudden you have a guy there that has a very low MMR queuing with a friend that has very high MMR. So for the system, it's really difficult to actually put these guys into a match that is fair, and also to try and figure out what exactly is a fair opponent for these guys. Because there's a lot of aspects that come in, of course, as well. A team that queues with 3, with 4, with 5 is much more coordinated than if you just like use 5 random players and put them into the other team. So you kind of have to try and adjust for that as well. And you can already tell that this is starting to get a little bit complicated. So we're going to talk a lot about the basic things of an MMR system. We're going to talk a lot about what's happening right now. But as you can see, there's going to be a lot of small adjustments to the algorithm that Blizzard has already introduced in the past. That's quite important here. What I want to say is, though, that a lot of the MMRs that we had before the latest patch were also MMRs that are like rating numbers that came from a long time ago, where the entire rule set that applied to Hero League was completely different. And as I already explained before, with the uncertainty factor getting smaller and smaller the more games you play, people that already had like 2,000 games played and had a pretty solid MMR, like that number was pretty set in stone. Not completely, it still of course mattered a bit of how many games you win or lose, but it was much harder for you to actually lose a huge amount of points there or gain a huge amount of points. So they had to do something, right? Because the rules changed, therefore a lot of people started to come in late, and for them the same rules didn't apply, so you could already tell that something was a little bit off there. And Blizzard knew that they actually had to deal with this somehow. And there's basically 2 approaches of how you can do that. You either go for a hard reset, which basically says you reduce the MMR of everybody in the system to the exact same amount. So you start from scratch. It's like a full reset. The other thing that you can do is you actually go for a soft reset. A soft reset is nothing else but your uncertainty factor reset. So again, your MMR stays exactly the same. But from here on out with a soft reset, your uncertainty factor is once again very, very high. And that means that in the first few games that you play, and also like for a long time after that, by the way, you are going to change your MMR a lot. So as you did at the beginning when you started your career. So all of a sudden a loss is going to give you, is going to reduce your MMR by a lot of points. A win is going to give you a lot of additional points. And that's the whole idea here. Blizzard realized that if they go for a hard reset and reset the number for everybody onto the same level, it's going to be utter chaos. And we're not talking about players alone that are playing like 10 games a day. We're also talking about like the grandfather or the dad with like 2 children who's able to squeeze in like 3 games a week, for example. And for these guys, it would be a lot worse if they all of a sudden would have to start again from scratch, because they're just not these grinders that we're seeing on Twitch that have the time or have like the passion to just put these daily huge amount of games out there. So Blizzard decided to go for the soft reset. They reset the uncertainty factor, and they said, this is going to adjust our system and the MMR levels over time. Because back then a lot of people said like, hey, there are these guys, they had access to the game a lot earlier than we did. Back then other rules applied, they established an MMR for themselves that is not really a good representation of their skill. We didn't get that chance because we came in later, so this is not really fair. The matchmaking system doesn't do anything. And Blizzard adjusted that with a soft reset. So the soft reset, as I already explained, basically makes sure that once you start winning and losing games, your MMR is fluctuating a lot more. And it's going to take a lot of games until the uncertainty factor is reduced to an amount where your MMR is very stable. And this is exactly what we are seeing happening right now. So a lot of people actually started to do their placement matches, and they expected the placement matches to change everything. Like everybody all of a sudden expected to be placed in like the perfect league. And that's just not how it works. If you paid attention to what I just said, then you know that your MMR is actually still exactly the same when you start. So now depending on who you are matched against and who you are matched with, you're going to lose more or win more points if you win or lose. The uncertainty factor, the multiplier, is also going to make sure that this effect is even stronger. But it doesn't mean that after the 10 games that you play for your placements, all of a sudden everything is back where it is. You are in the MMR range where it's supposed to be, and that's it. Your MMR is going to change for a lot longer than that. And think about like how many games some of the players played in the last season. There were people with like nearly 10,000 games. So when we're talking about 10 placement matches, this is just only the early adjustment. It's of course where the adjustment is the strongest, but it doesn't really necessarily mean that you're going to make huge leaps, because all the games after that also count, and they're also going to make sure that your entire system there adjusts quite a bit. And you can already kind of see where this is going. Like the more games are being played in the system, the more accurate it becomes. And Blizzard has already introduced it after the first season. When they are starting to head into the second season, they're going for another soft reset, and another with Season 3, and another with Season 4. And it makes perfect sense, because what it basically does is make sure that over time, the representation of this MMR number towards your skill is going to become more and more accurate. And it's actually like a very cool system. The only downside right now is that at this point, with the first season that we are playing, it kind of needs some time. When we're starting Season 2 and Season 3, that effect is not going to be as strong anymore. But at this point right now, the expectation that once that you've done your placement matches, you're going to have the perfect matchmaking system is absolutely crazy. This is not how this system works. We have 1 week in, and a lot of people, for example, that played Hero League before haven't even played yet. I just came back from Sweden where we were at the Global Championships. I didn't even have time to play Hero League. So for me and a lot of other people, they're just now starting to come in again. And the system is trying to adjust everything as much as it can. But the first few weeks are supposed to be, I don't want to say chaos, because it would have been chaos with a hard reset, but it's definitely supposed to be a little bit wonky. And that's what we're experiencing right now. So you need to realize that the system needs time. And with time, I'm talking at least another 2 weeks. Of course, it seems like a lot if you consider the season's not all that long. But as I already explained, going from Season 1 to Season 2 to Season 3, that adjustment period is going to become a little bit smaller. And the system will have to completely just like adjusted the MMR for everybody. A similar situation also applies when we're talking about Grandmaster. People have been saying like, oh my god, how could this guy get Grandmaster first? He's not really a good player in the old system. He was just like an average player. It's absolutely true. But what happens is that if you actually introduce a new league, or if you're talking about like the top 500 of Master League that become Grandmaster, at the beginning, when you first introduce that thing, it's always going to be a grind. Because the first guy who hits Master League is also automatically in Grandmaster, because he's all the way up at the top. So until Grandmaster, if we want Grandmaster to be an accurate representation of skill, or at least show us the best 500 players, we have to give it some time. Right now, as I'm recording this video, Grandmaster is not even filled. We have currently on the European server 420 Grandmasters. And it only means that the more people are starting to play Hero League again, the more people are putting the time in to actually get their games in. Not only does Grandmaster League fill, but slowly and steadily, all of the guys that are in Grandmaster are going to be pushed out. And that's also, again, because the uncertainty factor was reset. All the games that they play right now give them a lot of points when they win. But as they are starting to lose a little bit more, because more people are starting to play Hero League again, the pool becomes bigger, they are also going to lose a lot more points. And what you have to realize is that most of these Grandmasters that we have right now haven't even played 100 games yet. And 100 games in Heroes of the Storm is absolutely nothing. Games last between 15 and 30 minutes, depending on how good or bad you are. So that's really important to note there. You also have to think about the player base for a moment. Imagine the player base as a pyramid. You have a lot of like bad or mediocre players all the way at the bottom, a lot of casual players, and you have very, 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 very few good players all the way up at the top. It's also one of the reasons why the system is always going to be a little bit worse for the best players in the world, because the amount of players that the system can draw from is so much smaller. If you are roughly in the middle of that pyramid, or even if you're in the upper third, then the same rules don't necessarily apply to you. So that's also another thing that people have to realize. For example, you have a lot of people that are a little bit more, that are like, let's say, average. They watch a pro player. The pro player is struggling currently to get good games, which again, at this point in the system is absolutely normal. And they say, system doesn't work. I have the same problem. I am only playing with scrubs. I should be much higher, but the system doesn't allow me to do that. Well, bad news for you, because to tell you the truth, that system is probably working a lot more accurately for you than it does for the pro player, because the pool of players right there is much, much higher. Of course, there's other adjustments that we have to talk about. So Blizzard has realized that going from the old system to this new system needed a lot more than only the adjustments that I already talked about. So what they did is that they are not trying to balance average MMR numbers anymore. In the past, what the system was trying to do, let's say, for example, we have a team of 5 players, right? 3 of these 5 players have 3,000 MMR. Now the system realizes after a certain time, well, I can't find any more players that have 3,000 MMR, but I have this guy over here that has 2,000 MMR, and there's another guy that has 4,000 MMR that is also looking for a game. If I put those in together into the same team, then all of a sudden we have everybody on average has 3,000 MMR. Sounds awesome. For team number 2, it finds 5 guys that have 3,000 MMR. So all of a sudden you have that playing against each other. And Blizzard has realized and has actually stated that they feel this was not really well done, because that guy that has 2,000 MMR is completely lost in this team over here. The guy that has 4,000 is much better, he's frustrated, and in the end, at the end of the day, no matter if you win or lose, you end up with a game that probably frustrates you more than anything else. So Blizzard has already said in the past that in the future what they are going to do, well, actually like in this patch already, the system is going to allow for slightly imbalanced matchups. So they're not going to pick that 2,000 guy and put it into the same game. They're more going to try and get someone in there that has maybe like 2,800, and they're still going to put that 4,000 MMR guy in. That of course makes the match itself a little bit less balanced, but the match experience for both of these teams is going to be significantly better. That of course has to also be somehow then mitigated when the result kicks in, because all of a sudden you're going to gain or lose more points when you win or lose. So this is an effect that Blizzard is currently looking at, and that should also increase the match quality that we have, not really just like looking if we can win or lose that game. There's a couple of other things that people have been also complaining about, and I'm also, by the way, not saying that the system is perfect, right? I'm just saying that right now we can't really complain about the system, because the system is currently trying to adjust as best as it can, and for the system to actually get that chance to do it, it needs a lot more data. So before we have like another 2 or 3 weeks, we can't really go there and say like, the system is stupid, Mom, I'm placed in silver, but I'm diamond. So it doesn't work that way. And later on, when we have like a bigger sample size and the system is still not really working, then of course we can complain. Believe me, I'm going to be at the forefront of that. But of course, there are also a couple of bugs right now, or things that don't work. We've all seen pictures where like Grandmaster players currently are matched with someone that's in Bronze League, for example. That should of course not happen. Sometimes I guess it can happen if you play in the middle of the night, if you play at a server that already has a very small player base, and the system after a certain queue time just says like, all right, screw it, I give up. There's nobody else on. I'm going to throw these guys into the same game. So that can happen. It shouldn't, but it will. At some point, the system has to make a decision. It can't just like queue forever. An approach that I would really like to see from Blizzard is that the higher your MMR rises, that we have a bit of a dynamic system. Don't freak out, I'm not talking about dynamic queuing like League of Legends introduced, because we all know that's total garbage. I'm talking about like dynamic queue times. So that right now for everybody in the lower part of the pyramid, absolutely nothing changes, but the higher your skill level rises, the higher MMR is. the longer the queue time is, or the longer the maximum queue time is. Because most players that are on a high level are completely willing to actually wait an extra 5 minutes if they get a good game and if they're not stuck in a game that is actually bad. Another big change that Blizzard also introduced is that you can't queue with people anymore that are too far away from you in skill. And there's been a lot of complaints about this. I play with a friend, he's as good as I am, but for some weird reason he is ranked 2 leagues below me and we cannot play together, our life is about to end. That's the reason why Blizzard actually introduced the unranked draft mode, because now you can queue with your friend no matter where he is in the unranked draft mode. But no matter what you personally think about the skill level of your friend, if he's 2 leagues below you, that's probably where he belongs. And if he doesn't belong there, then he will very, very quickly rise to the same level where you at, and you can queue with him again. The only thing that he has to do is queue solo for a little bit, and not for long, because as we said before, uncertainty factor has been reset, so all those wins that he's going to get because he's such a good player are going to have a huge impact on his MMR. The problem that always arose in the past when you had like 2 players from very different skill level queue together with each other is that the matchmaking system was just basically sitting there, was just like saying, screw that, how am I ever going to get a fair match for those guys? And normally the team that had the duo queue was always in a spot where one of their players was extremely bad, another one maybe a little bit better, but it caused a lot of frustration. That is why Blizzard introduced the unranked draft mode, made sure that these guys can still play somewhere, but that the people that really want to like approach that more competitive level, that they have still a mode where they don't have to deal with these things. So that's another really important factor. Also, of course, that silence players cannot play Hero League anymore. That's also pretty amazing, simply because how many games did you guys have where one of the silence guys in your teams ruined the match for you? I mean, I can't speak for everybody here, I can only speak for myself, but I know that I had more than one guy that was silenced that simply at some point started, instead of insulting people, just ping spamming them and started feeding the opponent's team. So that at least is gone. Doesn't mean that there aren't any idiots out there that will still just try to ruin your game experience, but at least the ones that we already know about, they won't be able to ruin these games anymore. So I feel that was a very important approach as well. At the end of the day, what I'm really saying here is that the system and the way that Blizzard approached the system with the soft reset and all these other changes is definitely going to make that matchmaking system better. It's never going to be 100% perfect because there's a lot of things that the system simply cannot account for. But the only thing that Blizzard can do, the only thing that Blizzard should do, and also has to, of course, is to constantly try to improve the system to make match quality better. The pros are always going to be a bit of an exception. For them, of course, Blizzard needs to really try to balance it around them as well. But they're always going to be in a bit of a different spot because for them it's even more difficult since there are not as many pro players as average players, for example. But what's really important here is to realize that with the way that matchmaking works, there cannot be an immediate change after the patch that makes everything better. It's definitely a process, and the process is going to take much longer for Season 1 than it's going to take for Season 2, Season 3, or Season 4. So the only thing that I'm really asking, guys, is that you realize this, that you have a little bit of patience, and that you just give the system a chance to actually adjust these things. Not everything is perfect. Blizzard will still have to make sure that they look into bugs and look into extreme cases, but right now, complaining about where you got placed, complaining about like what kind of quality of matches you get is a bit silly. The system cannot work properly at this point. Grandmaster cannot work properly right now. It needs a bit of time to actually get the data in first, to get the players in, to get everybody playing, get everybody ranked up, and make sure that there's a good representation of skill. So that's basically all that I want to say here. I hope that it's a little bit clearer right now. It's a very complex matter, so it's not like we can really go into too many examples or anything, but I hope that you understand a little bit of how these systems work and that maybe 1 or 2 questions that you had in the past were answered here. If I failed to do that, then I apologize. I did my best. You can, of course, always leave comments in the YouTube video as well. Guys, that's it for today. I hope you learned something or you understand a little bit more of how these systems work. Yeah, it's kind of it. So see you with the next cast and see you in the Nexus.